Good evening, and I already see some people in the house. You will notice a poll up there. One of the things that I will do from time to time is start to include some polls so that you guys can have more feedback in direction and information. The reason for tonight's poll is that there were two messages that I ended up giving related to textual criticism directly. One of them was on the Old Testament, and it was broadcast live from the Strong Tower Conference onto my station. I didn't know how that broadcasting onto my station went, and so I created a poll to see if any of you saw that Friday night on the station. By the way, the conference went really well. We got to talk to a young man named Ahmed. I'm not kidding. His name was Ahmed, who was at the mosque in California. And so I am back. I'm getting back into the schedule, but this will give you guys more feedback and maybe some people even who tune in more feedback as far as direction, programming. I might ask about aesthetic things as I try to produce a better broadcast. Tonight's broadcast follows on the heels of that. While on Friday I addressed textual criticism and the Old Testament, on Saturday I addressed textual criticism and the New Testament in the main session. And so I'm going to end up doing a augmented, improved presentation on textual criticism and the New Testament. Now, Slam has been doing some stuff on that by posting about some live streams being done by a professor related to the synoptic problem and some of those things. I am not going to get that deep into textual criticism. My concern for the believers at the conference was the ability to counter the charge by Muslims that our Bible was corrupted without too much fanfare and fairly quickly, because you don't always have time at the mosque. And the other thing I wanted to do was show that the original text could be reconstructed from the different manuscripts and variants with a very, very interesting practical exercise. So you are going to get in on the practical exercise tonight. Without further ado, let me take a few comments here. Yes, there were some sound problems with Dr. J. Smith. Those were improved on the next night. It had to do with him using his software in connection with them. And so that did happen. Shout out to Nate2D2. And we're going to get going. That poll's there. And it's another way for me to be able to communicate with you guys and others who see the program. So I hope that works really well for you. My virtual assistants are back. I've missed them. And so they're going to be a part of things tonight too. And maybe that's just kind of a unique Jeff sort of flavor that I like putting in on top of everything else. So let me go to the share. Okay. Whoops. Yes, that was the theme from Perry Mason, because when I set these two up for the conference, I wanted to treat it like a courtroom, Can we trust our Bible? And so I actually included the soundtrack from the old Perry Mason show. I just couldn't resist. I love pulling some of those cultural references right out. Well, let me introduce you to the assistant that will be helping us tonight and what she is going to go ahead and ask. And so she asked, what do Muslims believe about the transmission of the Quran, and how does it affect their idea that the Bible is corrupted? And so we're going to dig into that. You need to understand that Muslims have a different view of transmission than we do. And there are some reasons why our Bible is transmitted the way it is. And so I thought I would go ahead and put that up. Muslims are taught that the Quran came down from heaven and was given directly to Muhammad, who transmitted it verbally to individuals that copied it. There was no transmission on the video because you saw Bridget's words in bubbles. So it was a little bit more like a Marvel comic book. But she can have some background music too in the future, and that would be fun to go ahead and design. But that was a little bit more Marvel-esque with the words just sort of appearing. And so that was Slam that asked that, and it was a great question. She is not mute, but her words appear as bubbles, at least presently. So they believe that the Quran was given from heaven, by the way, and there are those passages and Muslims that would even argue that the Quran is eternal. That itself presents problems. I'm not going to present that tonight. Muhammad got it. He recited it to individuals that copied it down. You have to know that Muhammad couldn't write. And so he was actually illiterate, which is, they say, part of the miracle of the Quran, that an illiterate man could go ahead and do such stuff. I look at it more like an illiterate man can be demon deceived. And so that's not such a miracle to me. We need to understand what we mean when we're talking to a Muslim about the transmission of our Bible. There are reasons it's transmitted the way it is, but we need to have a firm handle if we're going to even discuss textual criticism. You see, we didn't get our Bible the same way. And so we have multiple manuscripts of different families that we have to go ahead and deal with. And so I thought that I would explain that. Slam put up a comment I'll put up later that is just absolutely wonderful and has some humor to it, very witty and worthwhile. So I will save that for the end, and we'll go over comments, but truly treasured. And so those who can see it in the chat box already, I'll pull it up later for everybody. That is definitely a keeper. The best statement I know over the Chicago Statement on Inerrancy, two statements were come up with. A group of men came up with what was called the Chicago Statement on Inerrancy, and there was a follow-up called the Chicago Statement on Hermeneutics. These are probably two of the best crafted documents I've ever seen. And I was impressed by them and the work that went into them. I was also impressed that they did it as a series of affirmations and a series of denials, which I thought was a terribly impressive way to go about this. And so I'm going to pull up that Chicago Statement right now. This is from the Chicago Statement on Inerrancy. You will see a citation to it. It was taken off of Moody Bible Institute's website. Now, this exists in other places too, but Moody Bible was kind enough to present it. They preserved it. It goes back a little ways. And so if you go to moodybible.org beliefs, the Chicago Statement of Inerrancy is actually on their beliefs page with a link. We believe that inspiration, strictly speaking, applies only to the autographic text of Scripture, which in the providence of God can be ascertained, look at those words, can be ascertained from available manuscripts with great accuracy. We further affirm the copies and translations of Scripture are the Word of God to the extent that they faithfully represent the original. Now, why did I do this? because we do not believe that there is a specific, or I do not believe, and neither did these men, that there was an inspired translation of the Bible that was given. What we're talking about here are the original autographic texts. What we're talking about is the transmission of those texts through various manuscripts. And so I wanted to be clear about that because it's distinctly different than what the Muslim believes. We do not believe that our Bible was given as a whole, all at once, to one specific penman who recited it to those who transmitted it in writing. So our understanding of the transmission of the Word of God is different. Okay? Now, that causes Muslims to make the argument that our Bible has been corrupted. And they will point to variants between different manuscripts if they're very savvy, or between translations. And so we're going to deal with variants first. The translations are a different thing. That's taking the same Bible text and going from one language to another, or from going to a version of one language to another. And in the case of the King James, we're talking about the difference between Old English and more modern English. There have been things that changed even within our own language. And so that's what we're talking about with a translation, such as taking the Bible and translating it into French. That's different than a variant. A variant is dealing with manuscripts that are transcriptions of the Bible in terms of the Greek and Hebrew, which were original languages by and large. They're not translations into English. They're languages the Bible was written in. And so we have to know how to deal with variants. Variants are distinctions. And then we'll talk about the witnesses for the defense, for the preservation of the Scripture. And so our friend Bridget asks, how do we deal with variants? Now, this is cool because we're going to be able to do a little experiment that I did, basically demonstrating get the original text. And that's what Bridget is asking about in the next thing. She says, looking at the different variants, is it possible to piece together the original text? Now, what we do not have is the original text in the sense of one text that's the original text. What we have are manuscripts that the Bible was copied into that are what we understand. And there were some of these, and we're going to look at some of these, but let's deal with it. Let's pretend that there were different scribes of different scribal schools at slightly different periods of time that transcribed the preamble to our Constitution. Let's suppose our preamble to our Constitution had actual variants. Now, I think this is a great thought experiment. And by the way, Edward Decore and Anthony Rogers really kind of like this. And so let's go through this and see how this works. And my goal here is to show us that we can come up with the original text by doing this, and that there is a way to get to the original manuscript from this, these different manuscripts. Get to the original autograph is a better way to put it. So let me go through here this, and hang with me as we do this really cool thought experiment that demonstrates that we can reconstruct the original autographs from different manuscripts under slightly different conditions and times. Now, in order to do this, I created some families of scribes that transcribed the preamble to the Constitution at different times with slightly different scribal habits, which is exactly what happened, particularly with our New Testament, not so much with the Old. And remember, we're dealing with the New tonight. Now, the Old has far less variance because of the scrupulous manner, I shouldn't say manner, because of the practices of the Jewish scribes. There are far less variance in the Hebrew text than in the New Testament text. And I covered that when I did this at the conference. And so we are now dealing with the New Testament, which has a larger number of variants, but has a tremendously larger number of manuscripts. So the strength of the New Testament is in the number of manuscripts by which we can construct the autographs. The strength of the Old Testament is why we have less manuscripts. We have more precision in the preservation of the autographs from being transferred to those manuscripts. In other words, the strength of the Old Testament is precision. The strength of the New Testament manuscripts lies in number. All right. So with that in mind, let's say there was a Textus Constitutionum B that was written. We can date these particular manuscript family back to about 1880 in some of these manuscripts. And we know that these scribes had a habit of taking the first part of something and sticking it in the margins with more expansion so that it was very clear. Okay, so we have we, and you see the people of the United States. See, they were clarifying who the we were, and they slipped that over to the side, to the margin, just a little bit. In order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish the Constitution of the United States. So this is an example of Textus Constitutionum B, and these manuscripts date to about 1880. Now, we also know the number. The number of manuscripts that fall under this family are roughly 1,000 in this thought experiment. But notice that there are later manuscripts, allowing for 1775 to be the rough date of the preamble. These are later manuscripts, but we have about 1,000 of them. Now we have Textus Constitutionum C. Now these are earlier manuscripts. They're 1790. It was a habit of these scribes occasionally to miss a word, finding a synonym or phrase like it. So they would sometimes find a synonym or a phrase that meant the same thing as the word to try and convey the sense. They weren't trying to change the meaning. They didn't change the meaning, but they kind of wanted to make things clearer that way. And so we have an example of Textus Constitutionum C. These are now, these only have 200 manuscripts. So these are earlier manuscripts, but we have less of them. We, the people of the United States, for the purpose of forming a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. And you can see where it's underlined there. The word established, that word that was there before, it's now for the purpose of. Instead of in order to, for the purpose of. So they were looking for a synonym to convey the meaning of the original text, but that's what they did. And so we have them. And so what we see are less manuscripts earlier, and we know the habits of those scribes. Now we have Textus Constitutionum A. Now that has slightly more manuscripts than the previous one that only had 200, but this is an even earlier text of the preamble. This goes to 1779, which would be only about 5 years from the original. These particular scribes were noted for spelling variants. They were bad spellers, such as the word described before is one of the things that promotes variance. A lot of your variants, in fact, I called variance spelling mistakes. And by and large, that's what these are. And these guys as scribes were just very bad spellers. So we look through here and we read through it. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and established the Constitution for the United States of America. Now, this is these particular scribes. Now, what I have are several manuscript families. Okay, and what I'm doing with our preamble is exactly what happened. Shouldn't say exactly, pretty much what happened with the New Testament. There were different manuscript families. So we talk about the Byzantine text, the Western text, and what's called the Caesarean family of texts. All right. Now, the question that I ask people is, could we reconstruct the original from the variants? And they, by and large, sitting in a room full of people, said, yes, we could easily construct the original manuscript from the variants. And see, if you could do that with something like our Constitution, you could clearly do something like that with the scriptures. And so this thought experiment was designed that you don't need to be afraid of variants at all, because they don't really represent a problem. And we can construct the original manuscripts. So we're in a court of law, and we had the Perry Mason song, and we did the thought experiment, which I used as Exhibit A. It is possible to come up or put the original text together with very little problem, knowing the number of manuscripts, the date of those manuscripts, and the exact habit of those scribes. And so we don't need to be afraid of that. When was the earliest manuscripts that we have written, and how does that relate to the time when the last apostle stepped off the stage? In other words, the last apostle would be a living witness to what that original autograph should look like or read like. And so what is the space of time from that last witness to our earliest written record or manuscript is the question that comes up. Was there time for tremendous error to even happen? Was there time for corruption to happen? Well, let's establish about the time that the last of the apostolic witnesses would have lived. And so Revelation may have been composed between 68 and 69. Now, I do not favor the early date for Revelation. Some of my friends do. They're often preterists. I find preterism to be a very, very faulty way to view prophecy. Really problematic. A preterist believes that all end-time prophecy has been fulfilled, in case you didn't notice. And so that's the general preteristic position they take most of Daniel and Revelation to already be fulfilled. So there really isn't a lot of prophecy left to end up being fulfilled. That's the preterist position, and I find it terribly faulty. But my preterist friends would put Revelation as being composed between 68 and 69. During the religious upheaval that followed the reign of Emperor Nero. The other date given for Revelation is AD 95 during Emperor Domitian. Now, I favor the later date because of the nature of John's writing and the questions that I think people were facing in John's day. But beyond that, the later date has the support of Irenaeus and Eusebius in his ecclesiastical history. The early date was widely held in the 19th century, but the later date has gained popularity in the 20th century. If you want to know where I got that from, that's David Seal in the Lexham Bible Dictionary. And I favor the later date. Now, the later date even creates less time between the last living apostolic witness and the first manuscripts that we have of the New Testament still in existence. All right? However, interestingly, if we place John's death as approximately 90 AD, which would be a good place to place it, we have the first New Testament manuscripts going back almost to the time of John. So there's very little time for any corruption to occur at all between the end of the living apostolic witnesses and our earliest manuscripts. So let's start talking about those. Let's bring the separate witnesses up to the bar to be cross-examined. And as I said, the fidelity of the New Testament is the multiplicity of manuscripts, while the Old Testament's reliability relies more on the incredible precision and accuracy of the scribes. Norman Geisler points this out with William Nix in A General Introduction to the Bible. A very, very useful book in this area. One of the earliest, in fact, the earliest we have is P52, known as the John Rylands fragment of John 18:31 through 33. Now, it's not the entire New Testament in its entirety, but it is a very, very early fragment. Now, it measures about 2.5 by 3.5 inches. Now, there's a counter that Muslims use that I will warn you about, and I'll tell you how I would deal with that counter, and you can even tell me what you think. It is a small fragment, but it dates back to AD 117 to 138. Now, if you allow for John's death to be about 90 or later, if Revelation was written at 95 AD, you can see the lack of time between the Rhineland papyri, or Papyrus 52, and the last apostolic witness being living. So there's very little gap between the last apostolic witness passing off the scene and the John Rylands fragment, or Papyrus 52. Now, your Muslim will say, yes, but it's the size of a postage stamp. And we're going to see a lot of witnesses to the New Testament. Size is not what's important here. And so I used an analogy with some of the folks that asked me about this at the conference. If I had a set of 100 witnesses and one of them was 4'8", would that mean that he was unsound as a witness if his testimony corroborated with 99 other witnesses? Would you invalidate that man's testimony, which corroborates with 100 witnesses, because his height was 4'9"? It is not the size, it is the collaboration between the witnesses that proves the fidelity of the transmission. So what other witnesses are there? Well, we have Papyrus 45, 46, and 47, known as the Chester Beatty Papyri. This is AD 250. 300 years before Muhammad even enters the scene, we have this papyrus. How much is this? This codex contains some 220 leaves, measuring 10 by 8. Several small fragments of Matthew from these papyri appear in a collection in Vienna, but you and I aren't going to get a plane ticket there anytime soon. And you have 2 from John, 2 from Mark, 6 from Mark, 7 from Luke, 13 from Acts here, and a good number of them. The point is, this is AD 250, 300 years before Muhammad. Well, the 2nd and 3rd century, some 100 years before Muhammad, we have papyruses also. 104 leaves of John 1, various sections. All right, now these are all individual papyri. It's like sheets of paper out of a book, or parts of a sheet of paper out of a book. But that's not the only thing they did. Codexes developed. Now, during the Jewish period, you didn't really have books, you had scrolls. People found scrolls to be inefficient because I know full well, growing up in the synagogue, that you have to mark the place in the Torah, open the Torah up to exactly the same place, and start reading where you left off week to week. And that is a work, to say the least. And so what was developed were codexes, which were more book-like. This was the latest development in technology. We have Codex Vaticanus B, roughly 325 to 450. Now, understand that Muhammad comes on the scene in the 500s. And so this is still 200 years before Muhammad. Now, this is a book It's the oldest unical. Now, unical has to do with the way they wrote on parchment or vellum. So we're not talking about papyrus, which is actually made out of papyrus plant. Okay, we're talking about parchment or vellum. And it's one of the most important witnesses. This is a manuscript copy of the whole Bible. All right. It wasn't known until 1475, and I'll bring that back up. But you need to understand something. There's a difference between when the manuscript was written and when we found it. So the fact that it was found is not the issue. That manuscript is dated to far earlier. Now, the reason that it's called Codex Vaticanus is because it was found in the Vatican Library. So they just stuck a Latin name by it. And so that's where it was kept. And for a long time, it was prohibited from being studied. Leave it to the Vatican. A complete photostatic or photographic facsimile was made of it. And so we have the photographic record of this exact text. That's important because things decay. Okay. Synecticus, and it's often in a, represented by the symbol Aleph. I kind of like that because Aleph's a nice Hebrew letter. It's the first Hebrew letter. It's around 340. Now, these are complete codexes, so they're in book form. And these are full manuscripts of large, huge parts of the Bible, as opposed to papyri, which are handwritten pages, all right? This is probably the most important because of its antiquity, accuracy, and lack of omissions. It contains 1/2 of the Old Testament in the Greek, and then all of the New with the exception of part of Mark. So I want you to see it's a very full witness, okay? Now, Muhammad comes on the scene around 550. This is still 200 years before Muhammad. Some conclusions we can draw with the P52 as a very early witness. Additionally, we have codices of the New Testament, which predate the birth of Muhammad by periods of up to 400 years. Look what Muslims are asking us to believe. They're asking us to believe that someone who comes hundreds of years after the copies of the New Testament can tell us that the New Testament has been corrupted on the basis of some book he got later. With Revelation, you compare the latter revelation with the revelation that came before. Okay? This is kind of an absurd claim. All right? But there's more here, because interestingly enough, on top of the normal manuscripts, the New Testament fathers included quotes from the New Testament in their letters. So it's like including the first chapter of Matthew in a letter you're writing to a friend. So there's attestation here. The patristic letters provide an entire other set of attestation to our New Testament text. And they were spread throughout the church's preview. In other words, these letters went out, which prevents any sort of tampering with the biblical text in terms of corrupting it or changing it. Now, why? Because Augustine has already written a letter to certain churches, including a copy or an exact quote from the New Testament. And then if the New Testament text had been corrupted, it would no longer match the quote in the patristic letter. Do you see what I'm getting at here? So how much quoting did these guys do? Well, Clement of Rome here. Now look at the dates on this. This is 95 to 97 AD. Contains quotes from the New Testament, including the Synoptic Gospels. His citations are more precise than those attributed to Barnabas. Okay, now they're not perfect quotes. There's a little imprecision here. There's occasionally some paraphrasing or that occasionally happens. But among his citations, look at the underlined text here. Okay, these are major sections of the New Testament. And so what I want you to see is that Clement is quoting majorly from the New Testament with a great deal of precision, generally with a little bit of give or take to all these churches on top of the manuscripts that are around. And if the manuscripts that were around were changed, then his quotes would no longer bear any resemblance to the original quotes. But he's not the only one. Ignatius is around in 110 to 117, 400 years before Muhammad. And you can see all the New Testament quotes there. Look at all that underlying stuff. I mean, I could sit there and read that. It has been said that you could virtually reconstruct the New Testament from the patristic letters and their quotes of the New Testament. All right? Now, again, we're talking the 100s. If John leaves the scene in the 90s, we're talking of a period of 20 years. We already have letters, and that doesn't include Clement, which is right around the time of John. And you can see all the quotes here. The chapters in parentheses are the places in his, where you find these quotes. I do not have the Logos copy of the Church Fathers, or I could literally put these up on the screen for you. But I do not have a copy of that in my Logos library. So that is an omission on my resources. Okay. The Didache was a church manual developed very early. The church needed a manual, and so the Didache was developed very early. And so let's talk about the Didache. And I'm going to see if I can bring this up so I can see what you see. There we go. And so this is 400 years before Muhammad. But again, if John passes off the scene at 90, okay, we're talking of a period of 30 to 60 years. And this is a major church manual. And so we can see major sections of the New Testament being preserved in the Didache. All right. The point is, when we look at this, the point is very clearly that the entire New Testament can virtually be constructed through the citations in the letters of the Church Fathers. J. Harold Greenlee was right when he wrote, these quotations are so extensive that the New Testament could virtually be reconstructed from them without the use of the New Testament manuscripts. This is Norm Geisler and Nix again. Early manuscripts demonstrate very little possibility for corruption to occur. Citations from the Church Fathers, not only with the manuscripts they had, but had been collected themselves, these manuscripts could widely be reconstructed. Knowing the habits of the scribes and the sheer number of manuscripts, we can trust that we have a New Testament that conforms to the original autographs without being lost or corrupted, and we can trust our New Testament. Now, someone might say, and let me remove this, but Jeff, why didn't God just use a Xerox machine? Back up here. There we go. Why didn't God just use a Xerox machine? I mean, wouldn't that have been easier? I want to give you kind of a difference here that I think will put this in perspective for us. We have a human divine Savior. Jesus is fully God and fully man. Our Bible is a divine human product. Since God designed our Bible to mirror the one he was going to send, it is logical that as a divine human product being copied by human beings, there would be some variance there. This is part of the uniqueness of our Bible And that uniqueness of our Bible as a divine human product leads to the potential for variance, and God manages to preserve his word in spite of those variants. And so that's what I kind of gave the conference there and discussed it. We have enough information to be certain of our New Testament without any problem. So let's go here and let's pull up some of the comments and maybe take a few of the questions. Now, I know at least one question that should probably come up about a translation that is favored by people. If you guys haven't already settled it all in your own minds or don't want to ask, that is fine by me, but I know that there's a controversy. Let's pull some of the fun up here, though. Slam RN says, and Allah's pen was eternal also. Terribly witty. You're not going to build a case based on it, but it's pretty funny, and I appreciate the humor and the wittiness. And I don't know if there's anything else. Just to go ahead, and I will jump in with this. The argument about the King James Bible is an argument about two families of texts. All right, we have the Alexandrian family of texts. Now, they are older, but we have less of them. Then we have what's called the majority text. Now, the majority text is called that because it's the majority of the texts we have. That is connected to the Byzantine family of texts. We have more of them, but they're far later. And so the argument is over, do we go with the texts that are the earliest, or do we go by the majority rules? Most Bible scholars who have studied textual criticism, and it's what I favor, believe that the earlier texts are what we should go with. The texts that are the shortest, because scribes tend to embellicize. Remember our little exercise here where they used a phrase to further indicate meaning? And so the earliest text, the shortest text, and the one that is most geographically dispersed, not in number, but just that they ended up in different places, are probably the texts that are going to be a better reflection of the original autographs. And so I am not a King James only person. There are also two readings in the King James, which I really do not like. One of them is in the Old Testament in Psalm 139, where the Old King James states, in terms of the days written for me when there was not yet any of them, it says, my members written for me in which there was not yet any. The Hebrew word is yom. Yom can mean members, but the better meaning in the passage, given the context, is days. And so I think that was just the scribe kind of not getting the idea as perfectly. The other one is in Acts, where the disciples are released for Easter. Well, the problem is Easter wasn't called Easter at the time Acts was written. Passover was separated from Easter in the Nicene Council. It was called the 14thers controversy, and up until that time point, Easter wasn't Easter, it was celebrated as Pesach. And in the Greek word is Pesach, or Passover. So what the King James writer did is he read the history post-Nicene into the text, which should read that they were released for Passover, because a bunch of Jewish disciples were not going to be released for the Jewish holiday of Easter. And so this is another place where I think the scribe translating made a mistake. And for these two reasons, among others, I do not favor the King James only position. It is not an issue of fellowship. When people make this an issue of fellowship, such as King James only, I think they are really, really messing up. And so can I witness with a King James only person? Yes. And if he wants to use the 1611, he is perfectly welcome to. I don't talk that way, and none of the audience he's witnessing to are going to understand a word he's saying because they don't talk that way. So, but he is welcome to do that, and the Spirit will just have to help them with Old English, I guess. But I do not favor the King James only position. So that's where we're at with this. This is just an introduction to textual criticism. Most of your Greek texts you can get with an apparatus that explains when there's a variant reading, in which places that variant reading is found. And so you can then weigh the manuscripts. And by the way, that's something we had to do whenever we did an exegetical paper. We had to weigh the authorities. And so if I was dealing with variants, I would have to look at which manuscripts those variants were in, and then make comments about what I thought was the best reading of the original autograph, and then do the exegetical study. So the first step in an exegetical paper when I was in seminary was to quote unquote establish the text. And that was our first step. Do not fear. The Bible you have is the Word of God. It was just a bumpy transmission because God created a divine human book. And so that permitted this situation. Nate, of course, is pointing to people. We have new subscribers, by the way, just to let you know. We do have some new subscribers since the conference. I'm terribly excited about that. You can support us at Chosen People. You can support us at Patreon, and someone has done that recently too. I do have a new thank you Roll'em credits that reflects that. So let me go back to brand and let you see what I'm rolling out there for the credits new, I believe. And this should show correctly. No, actually, it will not tonight because that change will take a little time. So that will be better for tomorrow because that will not have uploaded. It's just not where it should be. I will be putting that up tomorrow. I am grateful for everybody that is a part of this project. Feel free when there is a poll to take part in that poll. It will help me know more, and it will be a great guide. So, well, I know we're done a little early. Tomorrow we will do Leviticus, and there will be a poll with that too, and we will look at the beginning background of Leviticus and get started in the beginning of it, pericope by pericope, if I decide to continue with the series all the way through, and we'll look at what it means for us. So that is it for tonight. Comments, questions, and opinions are welcome. And I will also look at the poll. I will try to look at the poll. So 75% of you ended up, looks like 75% of you saw the broadcast live, and 25% of you did not see the broadcast live. I never, ever ask you to do anything that I don't look at. So there are links that will be available. Thank you so much for taking that poll for me. And I am glad to see that some of you made it. And those that didn't see it, sorry about that, because that was the Old Testament. 3 out of 4. Slam says 3 out of 4. Yep. And that was all free. And you had the 10% discount if you wanted everything else. So that was yours to take advantage of. Well, thank you, guys. I hope that went well. Welcome to the beginning of textual criticism. For some of you, this is old school, and you're terribly familiar with it. For some of you, this may be new. Hopefully, there'll be a few people that see this, have not heard of textual criticism, and this will not discourage them in their faith, but rather encourage them. I'm not doing anything on textual criticism of the Quran, but there was a lot of great stuff at the conference about that. Probably should build my knowledge of that up. But there are a bunch of areas I want to investigate. So, good to be with you. I'm going to Erev Tov, and then go from there. So, thank you so much for being with me, and see you all soon. God bless. Oops. God bless, and bye.